Ease. You don't understand, Madison said, her voice shaking as she held up the rusted piece of metal. Ease. This isn't random. Someone put this here on purpose. Ease. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Jackson Reed stared at the mark. Ease. His jaw tightened. Around him, 37 men went completely silent. Ease. Where? He said slowly. Did you find that? If this is your first time here, Ease. Welcome. Subscribe to the channel and follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Ease. I want to see how far the story travels. Madison Carter had not planned on finding anything that afternoon. Ease. She had not planned on much of anything anymore, if she was being honest. Ease. Planning required believing that tomorrow had something worth building toward. Ease. And for the past 14 months, she had found it difficult to hold on to that belief for more than a few hours at a time. She was 20 years old, and she felt about twice that. She had learned things in the last year that most people her age would not learn until they were much older, things about how fast a family could disappear. About how quickly the life you had counted on could come apart. About how the silence left behind by people you loved could be louder than anything they ever said when they were still alive. She had come to Decker's yard because she needed the work and because no one else was hiring someone with no references, no college degree, and what her last interviewer had politely described as an unfocused work history. Hank Decker didn't care about any of that. He cared that she showed up on time, worked without complaining, and didn't steal from him. She had been doing all three for 6 weeks. And it had become the most stable thing in her life. The yard sat on the edge of Calvary, a small town in eastern Tennessee, where the main street was 4 blocks long, and everybody knew each other's business by Tuesday morning. Decker's yard was technically an automotive salvage operation. But in practice, it was the place where broken things came to be forgotten. Old cars, half-stripped engines, transmission housings, exhaust systems pulled from vehicles that had died on the highway, all of it piled up in rows that Hank referred to as organized with a confidence Madison had never been able to match. She spent most of her days cataloging parts, photographing components for Hank's website, and occasionally hauling scrap metal to the back corner of the property where the heavier pieces were stored. It was not glamorous work. Her hands were permanently stained with grease. Her shoulders ached by 4 o'clock every afternoon. And she spent most evenings eating whatever was cheapest at the gas station near her apartment and watching whatever played on the television that came with the room she rented by the week. But it was honest. And right now, honest was what she needed most. It was on a Wednesday afternoon in early October that she found the mark. She had been working through a pile of motorcycle parts that Hank had picked up at an estate auction 2 towns over. Most of it was standard salvage-worn sprockets, cracked fairings, handlebar assemblies with bent stems. She had been sorting and tagging for about an hour when she reached the bottom of the wooden crate and found something different. It looked like a rocker cover, a piece that sat over the engine's valve assembly, and it was old. Not just old in the way that most salvage parts were old. This was old in a different way. The way that things get old when they've been kept somewhere deliberately, away from the elements, preserved against the natural process of decay. The metal was heavy, cast iron with chrome detailing that had gone dull but not pitted. Someone had taken care of this piece for a long time before it ended up in that crate. She turned it over to check the part number, and that was when she saw it. On the underside of the cover, scratched into the metal with what looked like a sharp tool not stamped, not engraved by machine, but hand-cut by someone who had taken their time, was a symbol. It wasn't large, maybe 2 inches across. It looked, at first glance, like a series of overlapping lines. Almost like a stylized letter or a geometric shape that hadn't quite resolved itself into meaning. But the longer she looked at it, the more deliberate it seemed. The lines weren't random. They connected. They turned back on themselves in specific ways that felt intentional. Madison set the piece down on her workbench and leaned in closer. She had always noticed things, not in a way that had ever made her popular. Her mother used to say that Madison saw the world like she was reading a page that everyone else was looking at from across the room. Ease. She picked up on details that other people stepped over. Ease. Patterns, inconsistencies, things that were slightly off in ways that were easy to miss unless you were paying a particular kind of attention. Ease. The symbol on the underside of that rocker cover was not something a bored mechanic had scratched into metal with a screwdriver to pass the time. Ease. The lines were too considered, the spacing too deliberate. Ease. Whoever had made this mark had been trying to communicate something or to preserve something, and they had done it carefully enough that it had survived however many years it spent in storage. Ease. She took out her phone and photographed it from 3 different angles. Ease. Then she sat back and tried to figure out what to do next. Ease. Hank Decker was 61 years old. Ease. Built like a man who had spent 4 decades picking up heavy things. Ease. And generally operated on the principle that most questions had straightforward answers if you were willing to look hard enough. Ease. He had known Madison's family in the distant way that people in small towns know each other well enough to nod at the grocery store. Ease. Well enough to have heard about what happened to them. Ease. He had given her the job partly because he needed the help and partly because he understood what it meant to be the person left standing after everyone else was gone. Ease. When Madison showed him the rocker cover and pointed out the mark, he put on his reading glasses and held the piece under the shop light for about 30 seconds. Ease. Then he set it down and pulled off his glasses. "Where exactly in that crate did you find this?" "Bottom," Madison said. "Ease. Underneath everything else." Hank rubbed the back of his neck. Ease. He had a habit of doing that when something was bothering him, and he wasn't ready to say what yet. Ease. "What auction did I pull this from?" She looked at the label she'd stuck to the crate. Ease. "Palmerton Estate, out on Route 7. You picked it up about 2 weeks ago." Palmerton. He said the name like he was testing its weight. Ease. "Old Jerry Palmerton. Did you know him?" "Knew of him." Ease. "He died about 6 months back. 90-something years old." Ease. "No family left. County auctioned off his property." Hank picked up the rocker cover again. Ease looked at the mark one more time and set it back down. Ease. "You know what this is from? This piece?" Madison shook her head. Ease. "That's off a shovel-head engine, 1970s Harley. This kind of piece, Ease, in this kind of condition." He paused. "Somebody was storing this on purpose." Ease. "This wasn't in anybody's barn getting rained on. This was kept. What do you think the symbol means?" Hank was quiet for a moment. Ease. "I don't know, but I know someone who might." He picked up his phone and turned away from her. Ease, and she heard him dial. The call lasted about 40 seconds. Ease. When Hank turned back around, something in his expression had changed, not alarm. Ease. Exactly. But a particular kind of alertness, the look of a man who had just moved from mildly curious to genuinely interested. Ease. "You're not going to like this errand," he said. "But I need you to take that piece over to the chapter house on Mill Road." Madison had seen the chapter house. Ease. It sat behind a low wall at the edge of town, a converted industrial building with motorcycles parked outside and a hang sign above the door that she had been told. Ease. Early in her time in Calvary was not the sort of place where you knocked unless you were expected. Ease, she said. "Hell's Angels," Hank said. Ease, and yes. Jackson Reed specifically. "Tell him Hank Decker sent you." Ease, "and show him what you showed me." She looked at the piece of metal on the workbench. Ease. Then she looked at Hank. "What did you tell him on the phone?" "I told him what you found," Hank said. Ease. "And I'll say this, I've known Jackson Reed for 20 years. Ease. And I have never heard that man go quiet the way he just went quiet. The chapter house on Mill Road was exactly what Madison had imagined and nothing like what she had expected. Ease. From the outside, it was exactly what people assumed it would be. Ease. Heavy doors, the smell of exhaust and motor oil, the sound of classic rock coming from somewhere inside. Ease. The kind of place that was designed, whether intentionally or not, is to communicate that casual visitors were not a priority. Ease. But when she pushed through the front door with the rocker cover, wrapped in a shop rag under her arm, and gave the man at the entry Hank Decker's name, something shifted immediately. The man, large, in his 50s, with a gray beard and a leather vest covered in patches, looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then turned and disappeared into the building without a word. Leaving her standing alone in the doorway. She waited. She counted to 30 before she heard boots on concrete, not one pair. But several, And then Jackson Reed walked out to meet her. She recognized him from the few times she'd seen him in town. He was in his mid-60s, built the way men built in an earlier era were built, not gym big, but work big, the kind of physical solidity that came from a lifetime of actual labor. His hair was steel gray. His face was weathered in a way that was honest rather than worn out. And he moved with the particular unhurried confidence of a man who had learned a long time ago that he didn't need to rush to be taken seriously. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "You're the girl from Decker's Yard. Madison Carter, Jackson Reed." He didn't extend his hand. "Hank said you found something. Let me see it." She unwrapped the shop rag and held out the rocker cover. Reed took it from her without ceremony, turned it over, and looked at the underside. Everything changed. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't gasp or step back or say anything, but something happened in his face, a slow, deep movement behind his eyes, like a door opening onto a room that had been sealed for a very long time, and for a moment he was completely still. "Where did this come from?" His voice was controlled. "Careful. An estate auction. Jerry Palmerton's property on Route 7. Reed looked up from the piece. Old Jerry kept this. "You knew him?" "But I knew who he knew." He turned toward the interior of the building. "Come inside." There were 38 of them. She counted without meaning to. The way she always counted things, a habit her brain ran automatically in the background of whatever else she was doing. 38 men, ranging from their late 30s to their mid-70s, arranged around a space that functioned as a meeting room and workshop combined. Some were seated, some were standing along the walls. All of them were looking at the rocker cover that Jackson Reed had set on the central table. The silence in the room was not the silence of men who had nothing to say. It was the silence of men who had too much to say and were waiting to understand what they were looking at before they said any of it. "Where did she get that?" one of them asked. He was somewhere in his 60s, with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw. His name, she would learn later, was Carver. "Decker's Yard," Reed said. "Through the Palmerton estate." "Palmerton," said another man, this one younger. Maybe early 40s, with dark hair and the look of someone who had grown up stories about things that had happened before he was old enough to understand them. His name was Dev. "Jerry Palmerton is dead. 6 months ago," Reed confirmed. He looked at Madison. "How long has this been sitting in the yard?" "It came in about 2 weeks ago," she said. "It was in a crate with other motorcycle parts from the same auction." "I found it this afternoon." 2 weeks, Carver said. He said it to himself more than to anyone else, like he was placing the number somewhere in a larger calculation. "What is it?" Madison asked. The room shifted. Not dramatically, just a slight reorientation. 38 sets of eyes moving from the rocker cover to her and back again. Reed looked at her for a moment before he answered, and she had the distinct feeling that he was deciding not how much to tell her, but how to tell her something that was going to be complicated. "Sit down," he said. She sat. 22 years ago, Reed began. This chapter had a founder. His name was William Callahan. Everyone called him Wade. He started this chapter from nothing, 5 men in a garage outside of town with 2 functioning motorcycles between them. He built it into what you see. He gestured at the room around them. He rode for 31 years. He was the best man most of us ever knew. Reed paused. He disappeared 11 years ago. The word landed in the room differently than she had expected. Not suddenly, not with shock. It landed the way a word lands when everyone present has been carrying it for a long time. She started. "He didn't die," Reed said. "Not that we know of. He left one morning and didn't come back. His motorcycle was found parked on the side of Route 22. He's about 14 miles from here. No note. No message. Nothing." He looked at the rocker cover on the table. "We searched for months. We hired people to look. We called in every connection we had across 4 states. Wade Callahan vanished and left nothing behind except questions." "Except one thing," said the man named Dev, who was still looking at the mark. Reed nodded. "Except one thing." "What?" Madison asked. "The mark," Reed said. "We found that symbol once before. Ease. It was scratched into the concrete floor of his private workshop here at the chapter house. Ease. Just that symbol. No explanation. No code to go with it. Ease. We never knew what it meant, or who it was meant for. Ease. Or whether it meant anything at all. He looked at her directly. Ease. Until now. The next 3 hours were unlike anything Madison had experienced in her 20 years of living. Ease. She sat at that table while 38 men, who had spent the better part of a decade carrying an unanswered question, moved through something she could only describe as a controlled unraveling, the disciplined, careful process of people who were very practiced at holding themselves together, allowing themselves, carefully, to consider the possibility that an answer had just walked through their door wrapped in a shop rag. They brought out photographs, printed documents, handwritten notes that had been kept in folders labeled with dates. 11 years of accumulated searching, organized by men who had never stopped looking even when they stopped talking about it publicly. Reed spread it across the table and talked her through it with the precision of a man who had rehearsed the presentation in his head so many times it had become muscle memory. Wade Callahan had started the chapter in the early 90s. In his day job before the club had grown enough to need him full-time. He had worked as a machinist, a man who understood metal and engines the way other people understood language. He had built and customized motorcycles with the kind of skill that other mechanics drove hours to witness. And he had apparently a habit of hiding things. He used to say, Reed told her, and his voice changed slightly when he said it, quieted in a way that told her. He was quoting someone he had loved, that the best place to keep a secret was inside something nobody thought was worth. He's examining. The rocker cover was examined from every angle. Men took photographs, one of them older, with thick-framed glasses, and the careful hands of someone who had spent his life doing precise work brought out a magnifying glass and traced the lines of the symbol without touching them. It's not just the symbol, the man with the glasses said. His name was Augie, and Madison would come to understand that he was the person in the chapter who noticed things the way she noticed things systematically. Without ego, with the particular patience of someone who cared more about being right than being fast. Look at the depth of the cuts. He varied the pressure. Some of these lines are deeper than others, a code dev said. Not necessarily. Maybe a map. Augie looked up at Madison. You said there were other parts in that crate, other motorcycle parts from the Palmerton estate. Yes. Are they still at Decker's yard? As far as I know. Augie looked at Reed. Reed looked at his phone. Then he looked at Madison and said the words that she recognized, even in the moment, as the sentence that was going to change things. We need to go back with you and look at everything in that crate. They came in vehicles, 3 trucks and 2 men who rode their motorcycles despite the October chill, and they filled Decker's yard with a presence that made Hank come out of his office and stand on the step watching with his arms crossed and an expression that said he was not surprised and was also very interested. Madison led them to the crate. Reed and Augie went through it methodically, while the others stood back and let them work. Part by part, piece by piece, each component held up to the shop light and examined on both surfaces. A rocker box, a timing cover, a derby cover from the primary chain case. A cylinder head that was so heavy it took 2 men to lift. They found the second mark on the cylinder head, different from the first. Not the same symbol, but clearly made by the same hand, the same deliberate pressure variations. The same careful depth, the same feeling of intention behind the tool. Augie photographed both, placed them side by side on his phone screen. Looked at them for a long time. These aren't 2 separate things, he said. They're 2 parts of the same thing. The yard went very quiet. There's more, Dev said. It wasn't a question. There has to be, Augie said. This is a system. These pieces are pieces of something larger. He looked at Reed. Wade didn't just mark these parts. He built a message into them. Each piece is part of a sequence, which means, Reed said slowly, there's a source. Yes, the motorcycle. Augie looked at him. Wade's motorcycle. The words fell into the yard the way a stone falls into water, the impact visible in every face around her. Rippling outward from the center in concentric rings of recognition. Madison looked from face to face. Where is it, she asked. The silence that followed lasted longer than any silence that had come before it. Then Reed said quietly, here, it's been here the entire time. The motorcycle was kept in a locked room at the back of the chapter house that Madison later understood was treated with a reverence usually reserved for things that were simultaneously sacred and painful. Nobody entered alone. The room had not been opened in years. Reed unlocked it himself. It was a 1974 Harley-Davidson FLH. Once black, now aged into something darker and more complex. It had not been ridden in 11 years, but it had been maintained. Someone had kept the deterioration at bay without restoring the bike to anything it hadn't already been. It sat in the center of the room on a stand, large and heavy, and somehow more present than a machine had any right to be. We tried to run it, Dev said from the doorway, the first year after he disappeared. We thought maybe if we could get it running, there'd be something inside. Something he'd hidden in the engine or the frame. We tore most of it apart. Put it back together. Ran it for 6 hours. He paused. Nothing. You weren't looking for the right things, Madison said. She crossed the room and crouched beside the engine. She was already looking. Her eyes moved over the surfaces the way they always moved over things she was trying to understand, not at random, not impatiently, but with the kind of systematic attention that her brain applied naturally to problems that mattered. She had always looked at things this way. As a child, it had made her seem strange. As a teenager, it had made her seem remote. Here, right now, in this room with 38 men behind her, it felt for the first time in her life like the most useful thing about herself. She found the third mark on the underside of the primary chain cover. Then a fourth on the inner surface of the timing case, visible only if you removed the cover and held a light at a particular angle. Then a fifth, the smallest of all, scratched into the inside surface of the left saddlebag mount, not on the mount itself, but on the frame bracket behind it, hidden completely unless you knew to look there. By the time she found the fifth, the room was so quiet she could hear her own breathing. She stood up, turned around. Every man in that room was looking at her with an expression she had never had directed at her before. Not the look you give someone you're curious about. Not the look you give someone you're evaluating, but the look you give someone who is doing something that matters. He built this over time, she said. He didn't do it all at once. You can tell by the tool marks the later ones are more confident. He was learning how to do this as he did it, which means he had a plan before he had the skill. Reed stared at her. How long, I don't know yet. But this wasn't a few days' work. This was months, maybe longer. She looked at the motorcycle. He knew something was coming. He knew it long before he disappeared. And he spent a long time building a message that he was sure someone would find. She paused. He just had to find the right person first. The room held that thought. Then Carver, the one with the scar, who had said almost nothing since she'd arrived, spoke for the first time in a long while. His voice was low and deliberate and landed in the room like something with weight. Wade always said the message was waiting for the right reader, Carver said. We thought it was a figure of speech. Reed was looking at Madison with an expression she couldn't fully read. Who are you, he said, not rudely, not suspiciously. With the particular quality of a question that deserved a real answer. I told you, she said. I'm Madison Carter. I work at Decker's Yard. That's not what I mean. He held her gaze. Who were your parents? The question landed differently than she expected. Not because it surprised her. She had become accustomed to questions about her parents. Had built a wall of practiced brevity around the answers, but because of how he asked it. Like the answer was something he already half knew. Like he wasn't asking for information so much as he was asking for confirmation. She felt something move in her chest. Not fear, something older than fear and more complicated. My mother was Claire Carter, she said carefully. My father was Thomas Carter. They died 14 months ago. A car accident on Route 22. She watched his face as she said it. About 14 miles from here. The silence in the room was absolute. Ease. She saw it happen in Reed's face, the pieces connecting. Ease. The recognition moving through him like a current. Ease. The expression of a man whose understanding of a situation was rearranging itself around a fact he hadn't known he was missing. Ease. Route 22, he said. Yes. That's where we found Wade's motorcycle, he said. Ease. 11 years ago, parked on the side of Route 22. Ease. 14 miles from here. Madison's voice when she spoke. Ease was very quiet. I know, she said. My father was the one who found it. The room did not erupt. Ease. It did not fill with noise and movement the way rooms do in movies when a revelation lands. Ease. It went the other direction entirely. It compressed. Ease. The way air compresses before a storm. 38 men pulling inward around a single fact that had just rewritten 11 years of searching in the space of 4 words. Ease. My father found it. Jackson Reed stood very still. Ease. Madison had the impression that stillness was something he had learned, not a natural quality but a practiced one. Ease. The result of decades of situations where the wrong reaction at the wrong moment could cost something that couldn't be recovered. Ease. He was applying that practice now, and it was costing him something. Ease. She could see it in the muscles along his jaw, in the way his hands had closed at his sides without becoming fists. He's Thomas Carter, he said. Yes, he found the motorcycle. He called it in. Ease to the county sheriff. She kept her voice level because she needed to ease, because this room and these men and this conversation were something she could not afford to come apart inside of. Ease. It was early morning. He was driving to work. He saw it on the shoulder and pulled over. Ease. It was just sitting there, engine cold, keys still in. Ease. He waited with it until the deputy arrived. She paused. Ease. He talked about it for years. Said it was the strangest thing he'd ever seen. Ease. A motorcycle in perfect condition just sitting empty on the side of the road with no explanation. Reed's eyes had not moved from her face. Ease. Did he know Wade? Not personally. He knew the name the way everyone in Calvary knows names. Ease. But that's all. She stopped herself. At least that's what he told us. The qualifier landed in the room. Ease. She hadn't planned it. It came from a place she hadn't fully examined yet, the place where the question her father had never answered lived. Ease. The particular silence he kept around certain parts of his past. Ease. The way her mother would sometimes look at him across a dinner table with an expression that asked something and received nothing. Ease. Carver moved for the first time. He walked to the far side of the room and stood facing the wall for a moment. Ease. Then turned back. Wade knew Thomas Carter, I'm certain of it. His voice had the particular quality of a man stating something he had just become sure of. Ease. Not something he had known for a long time. Wade knew a lot of people he never told us about. Ease, that was his way. He kept things in separate boxes. Why? Madison asked. Ease. Because he was protecting them, Carver said. Or he was protecting us from them. Ease. Or both. Dev had been standing near the doorway with his arms crossed and his eyes moving between Reed and Madison with the focused expression of someone assembling a structure in real time. We need to understand the timeline, he said. Wade disappears 11 years ago. His motorcycle is found on Route 22 by Thomas Carter. Who knows him somehow. Wade had already been building this message into these parts into his own bike for months before he vanished. And then 14 months ago, Thomas Carter and his wife die on Route 22. The same road. The same road, Madison had known that. She had known it since the day of the accident. But hearing someone else say it in a room like this, in this sequence, gave it a shape it hadn't had when it lived only inside her own head. That's not a coincidence, Dev said. I know, Madison said. We don't know that for certain yet, Reed said. But his voice carried no conviction. And everyone in the room heard the absence of it. Augie, who had been quiet since they'd come into this room, spoke from his position near the motorcycle without looking up from the cylinder head he was examining. There are more marks here. I found 2 more since she identified the first 5. One on the inner wall of the oil tank, one on the frame tube. Near the neck, you'd need a mirror and a specific light angle to see it. Which is why we missed it when we tore the bike down. He set down the light he was holding. He wasn't careless about any of this. Every mark is exactly where he needed it to be found only by someone who was actively looking. Or someone who noticed things naturally, Reed said. Ease. He was looking at Madison when he said it. She didn't respond to that directly. Ease. There was a part of her that wanted to close down to put distance between herself and whatever was being suggested. Ease. Because she had learned in the past 14 months that getting too close to things that mattered was the fastest way to get destroyed by them when they were taken away. Ease. But there was another part of her, a more fundamental part, Ease, that had been waiting a very long time for a room like this. Ease. For a question that went deeper than she'd been allowed to go. Ease. Tell me about Wade, she said, not the legend. What he was actually like. Reed pulled a chair from the wall and sat down. Ease. Around him, others did the same, not all of them. Ease. But enough that the room shifted from the charged readiness of men standing at attention into something more human. Ease. Something that had the quality of a story being told by people who needed to tell it. Ease. Wade was not an easy man, Reed said. I want to be straight about that. Ease. Because it matters. He wasn't the kind of person who makes everything comfortable around him. Ease. He had a hard edge, and he kept it sharp because he thought the world required it. Ease. But underneath that, he paused, choosing the word carefully. Ease. Underneath that, he was someone who could not walk past an injustice. Ease. It was like a physical thing with him. He literally could not keep moving if he saw something wrong happening to someone who had no power to stop it. He got in more trouble over that than anything else, Carver said. Ease. And there was something in his voice that sounded like affection and grief braided together. Ease. He couldn't calculate risk when it came to that. He'd walk into situations that didn't involve him. Ease. With no regard for what it would cost him. Because the math was simple in his head. Ease. Somebody needed help. So you helped them. That was it. He helped a lot of people in this county that nobody ever knew about, Dev added. Ease. Not because he wanted credit. Because he genuinely didn't think credit was relevant. Ease. You did the right thing because it was right. That was the whole equation. Madison sat with that for a moment. Ease. And the corruption, she said. What was he involved in before he disappeared? The room resettled. Ease. The atmosphere shifted not with reluctance, but with the quality of people moving from a story they wanted to tell into one they had to tell. Ease. Which was different. Reed leaned forward. About a year before he vanished, Ease. Wade started getting cagey. That was the word we used for it at the time, cagey. Ease. He'd always been private, but this was different. He was paying attention to something we couldn't see. Ease. He'd disappear for days, come back without explanation. Ease. He started keeping a second set of records we didn't know what they were for. Ease. And he didn't offer to tell us. We thought it was personal, Carver said. Ease. We thought maybe he was sick and didn't want to tell us. Ease. Or that there was something happening with his family. Ease. Though he didn't have much in the way of family left. He shook his head. Ease. We were wrong. 3 months before he disappeared, Reed continued. Ease. He told me, just me, in this room, with the door closed, that he had found something. Ease. He didn't tell me what. He said that if he was wrong, Ease, it was better that nobody else knew. And if he was right, Reed stopped. Ease. What? Madison said. He said if he was right, knowing would put people in danger. Ease. So he wasn't going to tell me until he was certain. Reed's jaw tightened. Ease. I told him that was the kind of thinking that got people killed. Ease. He said that was exactly why he was doing it the way he was doing it. The silence in the room had a texture now. Ease. It was the silence of men who had been living with the specific weight of an unanswered question for a decade and more. Ease. And who could feel that weight beginning to shift. Ease. He was already building the message, Madison said. Ease. He'd already been doing it for months, which means he knew, Ease, even when he talked to you, that he might not be able to deliver what he found directly. Ease. He was creating a backup. A failsafe, Augie said. Ease. Yes. He was encoding the evidence or the location of the evidence. Ease. Or the key to finding it inside the motorcycle. Inside something that would outlast him if it needed to. Reed looked at her with the expression of a man receiving a confirmation he had spent a long time needing. Ease. He trusted it to the machine, he said. Because the machine was the one thing he built himself. Ease. That he knew better than anyone. That he knew we would keep. He trusted it to the machine, Madison said. Ease. And he waited for the right person. Stop saying that, Carver said. But not unkindly. I'm not trying to make it about me, she said. Ease. I'm trying to understand what he built. Because if we're going to use it, we need to understand all of it. Augie spent the next 2 hours photographing every mark they had found and organizing the images on his laptop in the sequence he believed they were intended to be read. Madison sat beside him, and they worked the way two people work when they have the same kind of mind, not by talking constantly, but by thinking together in parallel, one of them noticing a thing and the other one catching the implication before it was fully stated. The marks, when arranged correctly, were not a traditional code. They were closer to a series of compressed references, a language built from symbols that a machinist would recognize, that pointed towards specific things without naming them. Tool marks that indicated specific measurements, reference numbers that, cross-checked against Wade's working notes, which Reed brought out of a locked cabinet with shaking hands, corresponded to specific engine components. He's not encoding words, Augie said. He's encoding locations. Where? Dev demanded. Somewhere in the machine, Madison said. She was staring at the laptop screen, turning one of the photographs in her head, rotating it against the physical memory of the part she'd held in her hands. He said the best place to hide a secret was inside, something nobody thought was worth examining. She stood up abruptly. Inside the machine. She crossed to the motorcycle and crouched beside it without ceremony. I need the left side panel off, she said. Two men moved without being told. Sockets appeared. The panel came away. Inside the frame cavity, tucked between the backbone tube and the battery tray in a space so small that it required knowing it was there to find it, was a metal cylinder about the length and diameter of a cigar tube, sealed at both ends with threaded caps that had been wrapped in electrical tape. Nobody made a sound. Madison reached in and took it out. She straightened up and held it in her palm light, for what it contained, though none of them knew yet what that was. She handed it to Reed. He held it for a moment without opening it. She watched him absorb the fact of it, the weight of it, the smallness of it, the outrageous compressed significance of an object that had been hiding inside a machine in a locked room for 11 years. Then he twisted off one of the end caps. Inside was a rolled piece of archival paper. The kind that lasted, protected by the metal from moisture and time. Reed unrolled it slowly. His hands were completely steady. Madison thought that must have cost him something. It was a list. Names, figures, dates, some handwritten, some typed and cut and pasted in the way documents from that era were assembled. At the top was a single line written in what she would come to recognize as Wade's hand large. Decisive. The handwriting of a man who had decided something and was at peace with it. For whoever finds this, be careful. It goes higher than you think. Below that, 7 names. 3 of them had checks beside them. 4 of them had what looked like account numbers. And at the bottom, circled twice, was one name that was larger than the others. Underlined, with a single word written beside it in the same decisive hand. The word was Hargrove. The room read it. Madison read it. Carver made a sound that wasn't a word. Reed's face had gone very controlled in the way she had come to understand, meant that he was experiencing something significant and refusing to let it run freely. He read the paper twice, folded it with careful hands. Set it on the table. Marcus Hargrove, Dev said. His voice had flattened into something without color. He's been on the county commission for 20 years. 23, said an older man from the back of the room, one of the men who had barely spoken since Madison arrived. His name was Pryor, and he was one of the founding members. One of the 5 who had been there when Wade started the chapter in a garage with 2 working motorcycles. He was a property developer when Wade was still alive. He went into local government after. A pause. After, the implication sat in the room without anyone needing to say it. What did Wade find on him? Madison asked. Reed looked at her. Then he looked at the paper. Based on this land deals. Maybe more. Properties acquired around the time of certain county decisions. Money moved in ways that don't survive a close look. He ran his thumb along the edge of the folded paper. Wade found evidence of corruption at the county level involving a man who's been sitting on the commission for over 2 decades. And he hid it, Madison said. Ease. Because he knew if Hargrove found out he had it, it wouldn't survive. Neither would he, Augie said quietly. Ease. The room held that thought, with the particular quality of a truth that everyone present had already half arrived at, and was now forced to fully receive. Ease his disappearance, Dev said. We don't know that, Reed said. Ease. But again the conviction was absent. Madison looked at the paper on the table. Ease. Then she looked at the motorcycle. Then she looked at Reed. Ease. My parents died on Route 22, the same road where Wade's motorcycle was found. Ease. 14 months ago. Yes, my father knew something about Wade. Ease. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the evidence. But something. She kept her voice steady. Ease. Is it possible that Hargrove knew my father had found the motorcycle? Ease. That he might have known something? The silence that followed was the longest one of the night. Ease. Reed didn't answer immediately. He looked at her for a long moment with the look of a man who was measuring something. Ease. Calculating what she could carry and what she couldn't, and whether he had the right to make that choice for her. Ease. Yes, he said. It's possible. She absorbed that. Ease. She let it move through her without breaking anything. Ease. She had gotten very good at that. Then we need to know what else is on this list, she said. Ease. And we need to know what Hargrove knows, and we need to figure out how much danger we're in right now. She looked around the room. Ease. How much danger we're all in. The meeting that followed was unlike anything Madison had been part of. She had attended town meetings, school board sessions, family arguments around dinner tables, all the varieties of group decision-making that she's in 20 years of living. This was none of those things. This was 38 men who had been doing things together for a long time, who had built the kind of trust that only comes from shared difficulty, working through a problem that had just turned from historical into immediate. They were not panicking. That was the first thing she noticed. These were men who had learned, over years and miles and experiences she could only partially imagine, to operate under pressure without letting pressure become the thing that made decisions. They moved through the information methodically. They asked each other questions. They disagreed sometimes sharply and resolved the disagreements without anything breaking. She sat at the table and watched, and slowly she understood something that she hadn't fully processed when Hank Decker had told her to come here. These men were not what she'd imagined when she'd imagined bikers. Or rather, they were that, and they were also something else. Something that had grown around the original thing over decades of being a particular kind of community in a particular kind of place. Something that looked, from the inside, a great deal like what the word family was supposed to mean before life demonstrated how rarely it worked that way. Dev and Augie worked on the document photographing it. Cross-referencing the names with records they pulled up on laptops. Tracing the account numbers through public filings that Augie clearly knew how to navigate with expert speed. 3 of the names on this list are dead, Dev reported at some point. His voice was carefully neutral. Natural causes on record. But the timing documented, Reed said, already doing it. Carver had made calls she didn't know to whom. But she heard fragments of 2 conversations that told her he had connections she wouldn't have predicted. People in positions that could move information quietly. Pryor, the old founding member, sat beside Madison at one point and looked at her with the direct, unhurried assessment of a man who had been reading people for a very long time. You're holding up, he said. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was an observation. I don't have a choice, she said. Everybody has a choice, he said. You're choosing to stay in the room. That counts. She looked at him. Did you know my father? Really know him. Pryor was quiet for a moment. I knew of him. I knew he was someone Wade spoke of not by name. But as someone in town who had done him a service. Something about information, about helping Wade understand what he was looking at. He paused. I always assumed it was professional. Technical knowledge of some kind. Wade didn't elaborate. What did my father do for work? He was an accountant, Madison said. He did municipal filings, county records. Pryor looked at her steadily. County records, he repeated. For 20 years, she said. The implication expanded in the space between them like something taking a breath. He could read those filings, Pryor said. He could look at those account numbers and understand what they meant in a way that Wade couldn't. Wade brought the evidence to my father, Madison said. Ease. My father told him what it proved. She said it was certainty because she felt it was certainty, not the certainty of someone who had facts in hand. Ease. But the certainty of a person who had just had the shape of a mystery she had been carrying for 14 months suddenly resolve into a form she could hold. Ease. And then my father died, she said, on the same road where Wade's motorcycle was found. Madison, I'm not falling apart, she said. Ease. I need you to understand that. I'm not going to fall apart. Ease. I have spent 14 months being the only one left in my family. Ease. And I have gotten extremely good at not falling apart. Ease. So you don't need to worry about me. She looked at the paper on the table. Ease. At the name circled twice in Wade's decisive hand. Ease. I need to worry about what we're going to do with what we know. It was past midnight when Reed found her standing alone near the motorcycle. Ease. The others had spread into different parts of the building, some still working. Ease. Some getting food, some making calls. The immediate crisis of the evening had settled into the longer work of figuring out what to do with it. Ease. Reed stood beside her and looked at the bike for a moment without speaking. Ease. He was a good man, he finally said. Wade. Whatever happened to him, Ease, whoever he crossed, he was one of the good ones. So was my father, Madison said. Ease. I believe that. Do you think Hargrove, she stopped. Ease. Do you think he's responsible for my parents? Reed didn't give her an easy answer. Ease. She had noticed that about him throughout the evening. He didn't offer comfort in the form of things he didn't know to be true. Ease. I think it's possible, he said. I think the timeline is suspicious. Ease. I think the fact that your father was on Wade's list. Ease. Even implicitly. Even without his name written there, I think that matters. Then what he did to my family, Madison said. Ease. And her voice was completely level, completely quiet. Ease. Completely controlled is part of what we're exposing. Ease. It's not separate. Reed looked at her. Something moved in his face. Ease. No, he said. It's not separate at all. She turned back to the motorcycle. Ease. 11 years it had sat in this room. 11 years with a secret inside it. Ease. Waiting. She thought about Wade Callahan working in the dark, literally. Ease. Probably in the same building marks into metal with careful hands. Ease. Encoding everything he knew into the machine he'd built and loved. Ease. Trusting it to outlast whatever was coming. She thought about her father, driving to work on an October morning 11 years ago. Ease. Finding a motorcycle on the shoulder of a road and stopping because it was the right thing to do. Ease. She thought about the way things connected underneath the surface. Ease. The way a mark scratched into a piece of metal could sit in a wooden crate in a salvage yard for 2 weeks before a 20-year-old girl with grease-stained hands and nothing left to lose picked it up and turned it over. Ease. He built the message for the right reader, she said. Ease. Yes, he just couldn't know how long it would take to find one. Reed was quiet. Ease. Then he was patient. That was maybe the most important thing about him. Ease. He was willing to do a thing right, even if he didn't live to see it finished. Madison reached out and touched the handlebar of the motorcycle. Ease. Cold metal, worn smooth at the grip. The machine that had held a secret for 11 years while men searched for answers in every direction but inside it. Ease. We're going to finish it, she said. She wasn't asking. Ease. She wasn't offering. She was stating a fact in the way that a fact needed to be stated plainly. Ease. Without performance. With the particular weight that comes from meaning something completely. Ease. Reed looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. Ease. We are. She didn't sleep that night. Madison drove back to her apartment at 2 in the morning with the engine noise of 3 Hells Angels motorcycles behind her. Reed had assigned them without asking. Ease. 2 riding escort and 1 trailing. And she hadn't argued because she was tired enough to accept the gesture for what it was. Ease. When she got inside and locked the door, she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the wall for a long time without seeing it. Her father had known Wade Callahan, not socially, not casually. Ease. He had known him the way 2 people know each other when they are working toward the same thing from different angles, one man with the evidence. Ease. One man with the expertise to read what the evidence said. Ease. Wade had found the corruption. Her father had translated it. Ease. Together they had understood what they were looking at. And then one of them had disappeared, and the other had kept quiet for 11 years, and driven to work every morning on a county road and filed municipal records for a man whose name was written in a dead biker's handwriting on a rolled piece of archival paper hidden inside a motorcycle engine. She thought about her father's face at the dinner table. The way he could be present and absent simultaneously physically there. Passing food. Asking about school. Laughing at the right moments. And yet somehow behind it all, a part of him that was always somewhere else. She had always assumed it was the particular distance of a man who worked too hard and thought too much. She had not considered that it might be the specific weight of a secret he had chosen to carry, because putting it down meant putting other people at risk. How long had he known? How long had he been sitting across the table from Hargrove's corruption in the form of county filings that crossed his desk every day? The questions kept her awake until the gray edge of dawn started working under her curtains. Then she got up, made coffee, and went back to work. Reed called at 7:30. Augie was up all night, he said without preamble. He found something. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She was there in 15. Augie looked like a man who had been fed information intravenously throughout the night and was still processing the last dose. He had the slightly hollow-eyed, slightly electrified look of someone who had not slept but had replaced sleep with discovery, which is a different kind of energy, more unstable, but also more precise. The table in front of him held 4 laptops, a printer that had clearly been working overtime, and a collection of printed documents arranged in a sequence that spanned the full length of the surface. The account numbers on Wade's list, Augie said, before Madison had fully crossed the room. I spent the night cross-referencing them against public county records. 3 of them correspond to LLCs registered in Tennessee in the late 90s and early 2000s. Shell companies, essentially no real operations. No employees on record, but they received payments from the County Development Fund over a period of 9 years totaling. He stopped and looked at her directly. $1.4 million. The number sat in the room. Infrastructure contracts, Dev said from a chair against the wall. Where he'd been sitting with his arms crossed and his expression set to something that had no comfortable name. Contracts awarded to companies that didn't build anything. The work was done by legitimate contractors. The shell companies collected a fee off the top of every payment and funneled it somewhere. We haven't found where yet, but the trail is there. It's messy and it's been deliberately complicated. But it's there. The names on the list, Madison said. The ones with the checks beside them. County officials, Augie confirmed. 2 commissioners and a planning director, all of whom served during the period the contracts were awarded. All 3 are dead, 1 in 2009, 1 in 2014, 1 in 2019. Heart attacks, 1 stroke. Natural causes on record. And the ones without checks, Reed said. He had been standing at the end of the table, listening. And the quietness of his attention was something Madison had started to recognize as the particular stillness he maintained when what he was hearing was costing him something. He's still living, Augie said. Still in Calvary County. And Marcus Hargrove's name is connected to every LLC in the chain, not directly. Not in a way that shows up on the first search, but as a registered agent for a parent company that owned all 3 shell LLCs. He paused. He was careful. He built several layers between himself and the money. But Wade found the structure, and Wade understood what it meant. And Wade documented it. And my father read it, Madison said. Your father was a municipal accountant for 20 years. He would have recognized what these filings meant the moment he saw them. He would have understood not just that money was moving, but how it was moving and why the structure had been built the way it had to survive casual scrutiny while failing any serious examination. Augie looked at her steadily. Your father didn't just help Wade understand the evidence. Your father was the only person in a position to authenticate it. To stand up and say, as someone who had worked with those filings for years, that what Wade found was real. That made him dangerous, Madison said. Yes, the word fell flat and final. More dangerous than Wade, Dev said. Wade was a biker with documents he'd found somewhere. A good defense attorney could have discredited him in a day. But your father, an accountant with 20 years of legitimate professional history. Someone who had handled these exact documents in his official capacity. He was a different kind of witness entirely. Madison felt the things she'd been holding back since 2 in the morning start to move in her chest. She pressed it down. She needed to think, not feel, or rather, she needed to feel later, when there was space for it, when the work was done. Her father had taught her that. You can cry when it's over, he used to say. When she'd cut herself on something as a child and wanted to stop what she was doing to process the pain. Cry when it's over. Finish the job first. So Wade hid the evidence, she said. He encoded a trail inside the motorcycle, not the documents themselves, which would have been too risky to carry but a map. A key, something that pointed to where the real evidence was. Augie looked at her with an expression that shifted. That's what I thought until about 3 in the morning, he said. The room changed. What happened at 3 in the morning? Reed said. Augie reached across the table and pulled a single printed image to the front. I've been reading the marks as a map. Locations, reference numbers, a trail leading somewhere. And that's partly right. But I started noticing something about the sequence, the order in which the marks were made. Based on the tool depth and the wear patterns, and the sequence doesn't lead outward. It leads inward. He looked at Madison. The marks aren't pointing to where the evidence is hidden outside the bike. They're pointing to something still inside it. The silence was immediate and complete. We took that bike apart, Carver said from across the room. His voice had the specific edge of a man who did not want to be wrong about something he'd been certain of. We took it apart 11 years ago. You took it apart looking for documents, Augie said. Physical papers, maybe a drive, something that looked like stored information. But the marks aren't pointing to a compartment. He pushed another photograph toward the center of the table. They're pointing to the engine itself, specifically to the cylinders. The man who understood engines the way Madison understood patterns was named Roy. He was 68 years old, had been working on Harley engines since he was 16, and had the particular combination of manual precision and accumulated knowledge that only comes from spending a lifetime doing one thing seriously. He had been present the night before, one of the quieter members, watching from the edges. When Reed brought him to the motorcycle and explained what Augie had found, Roy listened without interrupting, and then crouched beside the engine without a word and put his hands on it. He worked for 40 minutes. Madison sat on a stool nearby and watched. Not because she could contribute to this stage of the process, but because she needed to see it, because this was the moment everything before had been leading to. And leaving felt like abandoning something she'd promised to witness. Roy removed the cylinder heads with a care that bordered on surgical. He lifted the first cylinder off the engine block and turned it in his hands. Checking the bore, the walls, the base. He set it aside and did the same with the second. Then he stopped. There's something in here, he said. Quiet, certain. He reached in with 2 careful fingers and extracted a small sealed packet, not metal this time. But dense plastic sheeting, heat-sealed around a folded object approximately the size of a folded letter. Flat and light enough that it had sat inside the cylinder bore without affecting the engine's function in any detectable way. He handed it to Reed without drama. Reed held it for a moment. Then he opened. Inside was a USB drive and a folded piece of paper. The paper was a single handwritten page. Reed read it in silence. His face did the thing Madison had started to recognize: the compression. The controlled movement of something large happening behind a surface that was holding itself still. He read it twice. Then he looked up. He wrote this the week before he disappeared, Reed said. He dated it. He set the paper on the workbench. I'll read it aloud. Nobody moved. Reed read. Jackson, if you're reading this, it means I was right to be worried. It also means you found the right person to help you find it. And if you're holding this, you already know who that person is, because I made sure this couldn't be found without them. Everything on the drive is authenticated and documented. The account numbers trace back to Hargrove through 3 separate chains. The land deal from 2003 is the clearest. The county approved a rezoning that his shell company had already optioned 6 weeks before the vote was public. There are 3 witnesses who were willing to talk. I don't know if they still are. Be careful with the drive. More importantly, if anything happens to me, find Tom Carter. He understands this better than anyone. He's the one who helped me read it. He knows the risk. He accepted it anyway. He's a good man. Reed folded the paper. His hands were completely steady. His voice when he spoke again, was not. He's a good man, he repeated. Madison could not speak. She sat on the stool and she was completely still, and somewhere inside her something was breaking that had been cracked for 14 months. Since the morning, a deputy had knocked on the door of her dorm room and told her about a car accident on Route 22. It was breaking cleanly and fully, and with the particular relief of a break that had been coming for a long time. And she let it happen because she couldn't stop it, and because her father deserved a moment of being known. Nobody in the room spoke. Nobody moved. They gave her the time because they understood what they were watching: a daughter finding out that her father was exactly who she'd believed he was. And also discovering the weight he'd carried that she hadn't been allowed to share. And having to hold both of those things at the same time. After a while, she said, he knew it was dangerous. Yes, Reed said. And he did it anyway, because it was right. Her voice was steady now. It had taken a moment, but she had it back. That's exactly what he would do. Carver, from across the room, said nothing. But Madison saw him turn away for a moment and press his knuckles against his mouth. And she understood that the men in this room had loved Wade Callahan the way she had loved her father. And that they were carrying the same kind of knowledge, the knowledge that someone good had been harmed because someone corrupt had more power, and that it had been sitting in them for 11 years. She wasn't the only one who had been waiting. The USB drive went to Augie, who plugged it into a system he had isolated from any network connection and opened it with visible hands. Madison watched his face as he scrolled through the contents. She had gotten good at reading him, the particular quality of his focus. The way his attention sharpened around something significant. He went very still. It's all here, he said, quietly. With the tone of a man who has opened a door he expected to lead to a room and found instead that it led outside. 15 years of documentation, wire transfers, LLC filings, internal emails. I don't know how he got the emails. But they're here, they're dated, they're between Hargrove and the planning director and 2 of the commissioners. They discussed the rezoning in explicit terms. They discussed the payments. He scrolled further. There's a separate folder labeled Route 22. I haven't opened it yet. The room tightened. Open it, Reed said. Augie opened it. The folder contained a single document. Augie read it in silence first, then read it aloud. Because the room required it. It was a memo. 2 pages. Written by someone named Gregory Ashford, who identified himself in the document as a former employee of Hargrove's primary development company. The memo described a meeting Ashford claimed to have attended in late 2012, approximately 8 months after Wade Callahan's motorcycle was found on Route 22, at which Hargrove discussed the problem of his continuing exposure. The memo named Wade Callahan. It did not name Madison's father, but it referenced the accountant twice. It described a conversation about long-term management of witnesses. The memo was dated 2019. Ashford had written it 4 years before the deaths of Thomas and Claire Carter. He had written it and apparently given it to Wade or to someone connected to Wade as a form of insurance. And then 14 months ago, Thomas and Claire Carter had died on Route 22. The room was completely silent. Madison read the document on Augie's screen. Leaning over his shoulder, reading it once, and then reading it again. She didn't say anything for a long time then. Ashford. Where is he now? I don't know yet, Dev said. He was already searching. Give me a few minutes. Is he one of the 3 witnesses Wade mentioned? Reed asked. Has to be, Augie said. The folder is labeled the same as the road. He left it there deliberately. He wanted whoever found the drive to connect Ashford to my parents. He paused and corrected himself quietly. To the accident. Madison straightened up. She looked at Reed. Please, this isn't just county corruption anymore, she said. Please, this is potentially evidence of conspiracy. Of something that killed people. Yes, Reed said. Please. Which means we cannot handle this the way we would normally handle something. You mean you can't go knock on Hargrove's door, Dev said. Please. And there was something in his voice that suggested he was not entirely unhappy about the constraint. Please. No, Reed said. This needs to go through the right channels. Please. Through people we can trust, who have the authority to act on it. Please. And who are not connected to Hargrove's network. He looked at the assembled room. Please. Which means we need to know how far his network extends. Please. Before we move, we need to know who's safe. Carver, Madison said. Please. Carver looked at her. Last night you made 2 calls, she said. Please. I heard part of them. One of them you said federal. Is that what I think it is? Carver looked at Reed. Please. A communication passed between them that had no words. Please. There's someone I know, Carver said carefully. Federal level. Please. We've worked adjacent to each other before, in situations that weren't entirely different from this one. Please. I trust her, Madison said. Special Agent Dana Merritt. Please. FBI field office. Knoxville, I can reach her. Does she know you? She owes me, Carver said. Please. And something about the way he said it communicated that the story behind those 3 words was long and would not be told right now and probably didn't need to be. Please. Reed nodded. Make the call. Carver stepped out of the room. Please. Madison watched the door close behind him. While he's doing that, she said to Augie, please, keep going through the drive. I want to know every name on it. Please. I want to know the full scope before we hand it to anyone. That could take hours, Augie said. Please. Then we'd better start. Dev found Gregory Ashford 40 minutes later. Please. He was alive. He was 61 years old. He was living in a retirement community in Gatlinburg, Please. About 90 minutes from Calvary, under a name that was not Gregory Ashford. He had legally changed it in 2014. Please. Dev found him through a property record that hadn't been fully scrubbed. Please. A digital ghost from a previous address that hadn't been completely replaced when the new identity was established. Please, he hid, Madison said. He hid? Dev confirmed. Which means he knew there was reason to. And he's still alive, Reed said. Please. Which means either Hargrove didn't know about the memo, which I doubt, or he didn't consider it a live threat, since he didn't know where the drive was. He didn't know it was inside the motorcycle, Madison said. Please. Nobody did. Until now, Augie said, and the words carried the particular weight of a door swinging open from the inside. Please, we need to talk to Ashford before Carver's contact moves on this, Madison said. Please, if he's frightened enough to have changed his name and gone into hiding, please. He's going to disappear the moment anyone official starts pulling on these threads. Please. We need to give him a reason to stay and talk. We can't just show up at a retirement community in Gatlinburg, Dev said. Please. Why not? Dev paused. I mean, we could. He gave that memo to someone connected to Wade, Madison said. Please. That means somewhere in his history, with this, he made a decision to help rather than run completely. Please. He had a conscience. He did something with it. She looked at Reed. Please. People with consciences can be reached, especially if you reach them with something they've been waiting to hear. What's that? Reed asked. Please. That the evidence they risked everything to create is finally in the right hands. Carver came back into the room 20 minutes after he'd left. Please. His expression told her, before his words did, that the call had gone differently than expected. Please. Merritt knows about Calvary County, he said. She didn't say it like it was new information. The room recalibrated. Please. She knew. Reed's voice had gone quiet in a way that was not calm. Please, she said, and I'm being precise here, she said. Please. That name has come across my desk before. We've had Hargrove County operations flagged in connection with a broader regional investigation for 3 years. Carver paused. Please. There's an ongoing federal investigation. They have circumstantial evidence. Please. They've been building a case, but they've been missing the financial documentation that would make it prosecutable. Which is sitting on that drive, Augie said. Please, which is sitting on that drive, Carver confirmed. Please, she wants to meet. Today, if possible. She also said. He stopped. Please. What? Reed said. She said the reason the investigation stalled 18 months ago was because their primary local witness, someone who had agreed to cooperate and had knowledge of the financial structure, died before they could get a formal his statement. The room understood before he said it. Please. She didn't give a name, Carver said, but she said it was someone who had worked in county finance. Madison's throat closed. Please. She pressed through it. My father, she said. He was cooperating with a federal investigation. That's what I believe, Carver said. He's not gently, carefully. There is a difference. And Hargrove knew, Dev said. He's, or someone connected to him knew, Augie said, which is effectively the same thing. Madison stood up. He's. She walked to the motorcycle, to Wade's motorcycle. He's, which had held its secret through 11 years and 2 deaths and 1 federal investigation gone cold. He's. She put both hands on the frame and felt the cold metal under her palms and breathed. He's. Her father had not just helped a biker understand some documents. He had been a federal cooperating witness. He had been in the process of doing the most courageous and dangerous and quietly heroic thing a person can do, standing up against power with nothing but truth and the willingness to say it in public. And he had been silenced before he could finish. And Wade had known this might happen. That was why he'd built the insurance. That was why the drive existed. That was why the marks were inside the machine. Because the machine would outlast what was coming. And the machine would wait. She pressed her forehead briefly to the cold chrome of the handlebar. 1 breath, 2. Then she straightened up and turned around. We're going to Gatlinburg, she said. Today, we're going to find Gregory Ashford, and we're going to bring him back into this. And then we're going to meet with Merritt, and we're going to hand her everything she needs to finish what my father started. Her voice was completely steady. All of it. Every piece. Every name. The memo. The marks. All of it. She looked around the room at Augie and his laptops. At Dev with his connections. At Carver with his federal contact. At Pryor, who had been here since the beginning. And at Reed, who had been holding this chapter together around an unanswered question for 11 years. My father spent 20 years building a career that put him in a position to make a difference when it mattered. He was ready to use it. He didn't get the chance. She paused. We're going to finish it for him. Nobody argued. Nobody asked whether this was too fast or too dangerous. Or too much for one morning. Nobody looked at her age or her gender, or the fact that she'd walked into this building 20 hours ago as a stranger with a piece of metal under her arm. They just started moving, and that the particular quality of 38 people organizing themselves around a direction without anyone needing to be convinced felt, to Madison Carter, like the first solid thing she had stood on in 14 months. They took 4 vehicles to Gatlinburg. Reed drove the lead truck with Madison in the passenger seat and Carver behind them. Dev and Augie followed in the second vehicle, with the USB drive secured in a fireproof case that Augie had produced from somewhere in the chapter house with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a man who kept that kind of thing on hand because experience had taught him to. 2 more trucks followed with 6 additional members, not because Reed expected trouble at a retirement community in a mountain tourist town, but because he had learned over decades that the moments when you didn't expect trouble were precisely the moments that required preparation. Madison watched the Tennessee hills move past the window and didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. Reed let her have the silence. That was something she had noticed about him. He didn't fill quiet with noise. He understood that silence was sometimes the most respectful thing you could offer a person. And he offered it without drawing attention to the offering. It was Carver who finally spoke from the back seat. In the direct way he had of saying things that other people were thinking but navigating around. You doing all right? I'm working on it, Madison said. That's all you need to do. She looked out the window. My father used to take me to Gatlinburg when I was a kid. Every fall. He loved the mountains in October. She paused. He never told me why he loved that drive specifically. Now I'm thinking maybe he drove that road because it felt safe. Because it went the opposite direction from Route 22. Neither man said anything. The right response to that wasn't words. I'm not falling apart, she said. I just wanted to say it out loud to someone. You're allowed to, Reed said. Please. I know. I'm choosing not to. She turned from the window. Please. Tell me what to expect from Ashford. How do we approach a man who changed his name and moved to a mountain town because he was afraid for his life? Reed considered this. Please. Carefully, he said, and honestly. Men like that, men who made a brave decision and then spent years living with the consequences of it, they've had a long time to rehearse every conversation they might have. Every version of being found. The worst thing you can do is be indirect. You tell him the truth, all of it, from the beginning. You show him the drive. You show him the paper Wade left. He paused. You tell him what happened to your father, not to manipulate him. Because he deserves to know. And if he runs, he won't, Carver said. Men who change their names and hide aren't cowards. They're people who did something brave once and ran out of the resources to keep being brave. Give him a reason and the resources, and he'll find it again. He said it with the particular certainty of someone who had witnessed that exact transformation before. The retirement community was called Blue Ridge Estates, which was the kind of name that communicated exactly what it was trying to communicate and no more. The man registered there under the name Gerald Frost was in Unit 12. According to the front desk, where Dev had charmed the receptionist into confirming an appointment that didn't exist with a smoothness that suggested he had done exactly this kind of thing before. Reed left 6 men in the vehicles. He took Madison, Carver, and Dev to the door of Unit 12. He knocked. A long pause, long enough that Madison could feel the shape of the decision happening on the other side of the door, the calculation of a man who had spent years managing exactly this kind of moment. Then the door opened 4 inches against a security chain. The man behind it was 61 but looked older, not in bad health, just in the particular way that years of sustained anxiety age a person faster than time does. He had gray hair, careful eyes, and the look of someone who had developed the habit of reading a situation through a minimal aperture before committing to it. He looked at Reed, then Carver, then Dev. His eyes moved to Madison last and stayed there. Who are you? His voice was steady, practiced. My name is Madison Carter, she said. My father was Thomas Carter. He was a municipal accountant in Calvary County for 20 years. He died on Route 22 14 months ago. She watched his face. I think you know what that road means. The chain came off in less than 3 seconds. Gerald Ashford, which was how he asked to be called. The name he'd used for a decade of privacy, sat across from them in a small living room and held a cup of coffee he didn't drink and listened to everything Madison said without interrupting once. She told him all of it. Wade's motorcycle, the marks, the cylinder, the drive, the memo he'd written and apparently given to someone connected to Wade, who had included it in the archive, the federal investigation, Carver's contact in Knoxville, her father's role as a cooperating witness, his death on Route 22. She was precise and she was honest and she didn't soften any of it. Because Reed had been right, this man had earned the full truth. When she finished, Ashford was quiet for a long time. He set the coffee down. He pressed his palms flat against his knees. I wrote that memo in 2019, he said. I'd been carrying what I knew since 2012. I was in that meeting. I heard Hargrove say those things. He stopped. I didn't have the courage to do anything with it for 7 years. And when I finally did, when I finally wrote it down and got it to someone who could use it, I told myself it was enough. That it was someone else's problem now. It wasn't your fault, Madison said. I'm not asking for absolution, he said with a directness that she respected. I'm telling you the sequence because it matters. I got the memo to a man named Pryor Olderman. Hell's Angels came to find me because someone Wade had trusted told him I existed. He paused. Pryor found me 3 years ago and told me the drive was still missing but that they hadn't given up. He gave me a number to call if anything changed. Reed and Madison looked at each other simultaneously. Pryor, Reed said, with the tone of a man revising something. He came alone, Ashford said. He told me he wasn't representing the chapter officially. That he was doing it personally because he'd promised Wade something. Madison made a note of that, for later the image of the quiet founding member. acting on a private promise, quietly maintaining a thread that the rest of the chapter didn't know he was holding. She filed it in the place where she kept the things that mattered. Will you talk to the FBI? She asked. Ashford looked at his hands. I've been afraid for 10 years, he said, living under a different name. Watching the news out of Calvary County every week, waiting for the other shoe to drop. He looked up. Is your father Thomas Carter? He was willing to testify? Yes, and they killed him for it. Madison held his gaze. We believe so. Yes, Ashford breathed in slowly. Out slowly. If I testify and nothing happens, if Hargrove's lawyers bury it, or the case falls apart, I don't survive that. I have nowhere left to go. The drive changes that, Dev said. Augie has been through 70% of it. The financial documentation is complete. It doesn't need a witness to authenticate the corruption. It's self-authenticating. What a witness provides is the conspiracy layer, the meeting you attended. The conversation about managing witnesses. That's what turns a corruption case into a criminal conspiracy case. He leaned forward. That's what makes it impossible to buy your way out of. Ashford stared at him. You really think this is enough? I think, Madison said, that my father thought it was enough, and he was the most careful person I have ever known. He did not take risks he hadn't calculated. She paused. He calculated this one and decided it was worth it. I trust his math. Was quiet. Then Ashford said, give me 20 minutes to pack a bag. Special Agent Dana Merritt was not what Madison had expected. Which she acknowledged to herself was partly because she hadn't known what to expect, and partly because she had unconsciously imagined someone who fit a particular template that Dana Merritt had clearly never consulted. She was 52, compact, with the kind of stillness that Reed had the practiced, load-bearing kind, and eyes that processed information with a speed that was visible if you watched carefully. She met them at the chapter house because Carver had asked her to come to them, and she had come without argument, which told Madison something about the nature of whatever Carver had done to earn that particular credit. She sat across the table from Madison Reed, Carver, Augie, and Gerald Ashford. She looked at the drive in its case. She looked at the printouts Augie had prepared. She looked at Wade's handwritten letter, encased now in a plastic sleeve, that Augie had produced from the same supply of inexplicable preparedness that had given them the fireproof case. She read. She asked precise questions. She listened to the answers with complete attention and no visible reaction, which was professional and probably necessary and also slightly unnerving. Then she closed the last folder and looked at Madison. Your father filed a Form 302 with the field office in Knoxville in September of the year he died, she said. A cooperating witness statement, preliminary. He was scheduled to provide a full documented testimony in December. She paused. He died in October. I know, Madison said. You didn't know about the Form 302. No. He didn't tell us. She thought about her father's face at the dinner table. The specific quality of his distance. He was protecting us. Yes. Merritt looked at the folder again. The investigation was paused after his death because his testimony was the linchpin of the financial chain. Without someone who could explain what the documents meant in the context of legitimate county operations, the documents alone were interpretable in multiple ways. A good defense attorney could have argued innocent mismanagement. She looked at Augie. What you've assembled here from the drive, particularly the email chain, closes that gap. The emails are explicit. There's no innocent interpretation. So the case is viable, Dev said. The case is more than viable, Merritt said. Provided the drive's provenance can be established, which, given the documentation of how it was found and the letter from Callahan, she stopped herself. I need to take this back to Knoxville today. I need to brief my supervisor and our AUSA. This is going to move fast once it starts moving. Hargrove, Reed said. How much warning will he have? None if we do this correctly. Merritt looked at him directly. Which means nobody in this room talks about this to anyone outside this room. Not friends, not family, not other chapter members who aren't already aware. Hargrove has had 3 years of warning while we've been building this case. Ease. He has people watching for movement. The moment word gets out that the financial documentation has surfaced, he will have assets moved and lawyers in place within 24 hours. How long do we have? Carver asked. 48 hours. 72 at the outside. Before someone in the county administrations notices unusual federal inquiry activity and word gets to him through back channels, she looked at Ashford. I need your full testimony as soon as possible. Tonight if you're willing. I'm willing, Ashford said. Merritt nodded. She picked up the drive case. Then she paused and looked at Madison with an expression that was still professional but had something behind it, something that acknowledged that this situation had a dimension that professional language didn't fully cover. Your father's Form 302 is still in our file, she said. His statement, his words. She let that sit for a moment. When this is concluded, however it concludes, you'll be able to read it. You should know that. Madison pressed her lips together. Nodded once. Thank you, she said. The hours that followed had the quality of time that compresses under pressure, hours that should have felt long but didn't, because every minute was occupied by something that mattered and couldn't wait. Merritt took Ashford's testimony in the back room of the chapter house with 2 field agents who had driven from Knoxville at speed. Madison could hear the murmur of voices through the door, but not the words, and she sat at the main table with Reed and worked through what happened next. Because Merritt had been clear that the federal process would move on its own timeline and that their role was now to stay quiet and stay safe. He'll know something is happening, Reed said. He wasn't talking about Hargrove specifically, he was talking about the general fact of a powerful man's animal instinct for danger. Men like that develop a sensitivity. They've been watching for this for years. Then we need to be faster than his instinct, Madison said. Merritt's faster. That's her job, I know. She looked at the table. I know it's her job now. I know we hand it over and we step back and we trust the process. She paused. I'm just not good at stepping back. I noticed, Reed said. Without any judgment in it. Is that a problem? He thought about it genuinely. The way she had come to appreciate about him, he didn't give reflexive answers. No, he said, it's who you are. It's why you're the one sitting here. He looked at her. Wade built that message for someone who doesn't step back. Someone who moves toward the thing instead of away from it. If you were different, you'd have put that rocker cover in a pile and forgotten about it. I almost did, she said. But you didn't. She was quiet for a moment. The chapter, she said. The members who don't know what's happening. 30 of them were kept outside of this. For their safety and the operations, Reed said. I understand, but they're going to feel it when it comes out. They're going to know that something this big happened and they weren't told. She looked at him. How do you hold a brotherhood together when you have to keep secrets from it? Reed was quiet for a long moment. You don't keep the secret from them forever, he said. You keep it only as long as it takes to make sure it doesn't hurt them. And then you tell them everything. All of it. And you trust that people who've ridden together through 30 years of everything else can handle the truth about why you made the call you made. And if some of them can't, some won't like it. That's their right. He looked at her steadily. But the ones who matter will understand. And the ones who understand are the ones who make a brotherhood worth having. Madison nodded. She sat with that for a moment. Then Pryor, who had been in the building all morning, moving quietly through the edges of things the way he always did, came and sat down across from her. He set his hands flat on the table and looked at her with the direct, patient attention of a man with something he needed to say. Ashford told you I found him, Pryor said. Yes, I should have told Jackson. I made a choice not to, and I want you to understand why. He paused. When Wade disappeared, Jackson carried it. He carried the whole weight of the loss and the not knowing and the responsibility of keeping the chapter functioning despite it. I watched that for years. I made a decision that I would handle the parts of this that I could handle without adding to what he was carrying. I was wrong to make that decision alone. I know that, Reed. He's across the table, said nothing, but something in his posture shifted. Why are you telling me? Madison asked. Because you're going to be part of this chapter. Pryor said simply. He's not officially, not in any formal way, but in the way that matters. He's. And I want you to know from the beginning that we're not perfect. He's. We make wrong calls. We protect each other in ways that sometimes become their own kind of mistake. He looked at her with the clarity of someone who had lived long enough to know exactly what he was saying. He's. But we tell the truth eventually. That's the thing we've never been able to stop doing. He's even when we tried. Madison looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Reed. Are you angry at him? She asked. Reed considered the question with the same genuine deliberation he gave everything. I will be later, he said. Right now I'm just grateful he found Ashford. Pryor almost smiled. It was the closest she had seen any of them come to it all day. The call came at 9:17 that evening. Merritt's number on Carver's phone. He answered, listened for 40 seconds. Said 3 words and hung up. Every face in the room turned toward him. They executed the warrant, Carver said. Federal agents are at Hargrove's house right now, and his office. Simultaneously, the room didn't erupt. These were not men who erupted, but something moved through them, a collective exhale. A release of pressure that had been building for 11 years and 14 months and one very long day. And it moved through the room like a wave that started at the walls and rolled inward and broke somewhere in the middle where 38 people were standing around a table with a fireproof case and a handwritten letter and the specific shared knowledge of having done something that mattered. Madison sat very still. She had expected to feel triumph. She felt something different, something quieter and more complicated. With relief threaded through it and grief threaded through the relief. And underneath both of those things, a sense of completion that was not the same as happiness, but was in some ways more durable. She thought about her father, about him driving to work on October mornings. About him crossing Route 22 every day for 11 years with the knowledge of what he'd helped build. What he'd promised to testify to, what it was costing him to carry it. She thought about the version of him she hadn't known, the man who had walked into a federal field office and filed a Form 302 and said, in whatever language the form required, I know what happened and I'm willing to say it publicly. She thought about how that decision had not saved him and how it was saving people anyway. Which was not the same as justice, but was also not nothing. It's not over, Reed said quietly to her specifically. Arrest is the beginning. There's prosecution, there's defense, there's a process that takes time. I know. And some of it is going to be hard. For you specifically. Your father's role will come out. His cooperation, possibly the circumstances of his death. I know, she said again. I'm not afraid of people knowing who he was. She looked at Reed. I'm only afraid of people not knowing. Reed held her gaze for a moment. They'll know, he said. I promise you that. She believed him. She wasn't sure why she believed him so completely. Given that she'd known him for less than 48 hours. But there was a quality to Reed's promises she'd heard him make 2 or 3 during the course of this day that had the particular weight of words coming from someone who had learned through long experience that the only things worth saying were the things you intended to mean. Dev came into the room from the corridor, phone in his hand. Expression carrying information. Merritt sent a follow-up. They found documentation at Hargrove's office, physical files he apparently kept as his own insurance against the people he'd worked with. He was protecting himself from his co-conspirators. He paused with the beat of a man delivering the part of the story that lands differently than expected. The files include communications from 2013 from a private investigator Hargrove, hired to look into Wade Callahan's associates. He looked at Madison. Your father's name is in those communications, his address. His employer, his schedule. The room was very quiet. He was watching him, Madison said. For years, Dev confirmed. Since Wade disappeared. He was monitoring everyone connected to Wade who might have known something. And my parents died in 2024, Madison said. 14 months ago. 11 years after Hargrove started watching, Dev said. We don't know yet what changed, what made him decide to act when he did. But the investigators will find it. Madison stood up. She walked to the motorcycle to Wade's motorcycle, which had been moved back into the main room and now stood in the center of the space where everyone could see it. She stood beside it and looked at it for a long moment. 11 years it had held its secret. Wade had built the message into it with patient hands because he believed someone would come who could read it. Her father had spent years carrying the knowledge of what that message meant, waiting to deliver it through official channels that would make it count. Ashford had written his memo in the dark and given it to a quiet founding member who had carried it alone across 3 years. Pryor had found Ashford and given him a number to call. And then, on a Wednesday afternoon in October, a 20-year-old girl with grease-stained hands and nothing left to lose had reached to the bottom of a wooden crate and turned over a piece of metal. He did it right, Madison said. Not to anyone in particular. To the room. To the motorcycle. To the man who had built all of this and then trusted it to outlast him. He did every single piece of it right. He just couldn't do the last part himself. Reed came and stood beside her. No, he said. He needed help for that. She looked at him. He needed you, Reed said, and he needed us. And we needed each other. He paused. That's not a failure. That's how anything that matters actually gets done. Madison looked at the motorcycle one more time. Then she turned to the room to 38 men who had spent 11 years organized around an unanswered question and were now, for the first time, standing on the other side of it. Thank you, she said. She said it simply, without performance. In the way that genuine gratitude sounds when it doesn't have anything to prove. Carver, from across the room, in the voice of a man who kept his feelings behind a wall made of practicality and revealed them only through the cracks, said, don't thank us. You did the work. We all did the work, she said. Pryor quietly. From his chair. That's the first true thing anybody said all day. And Dev, who had been scrolling through his phone through the last exchange, looked up with the particular expression of a man who has found the piece of information that reframes everything that just happened. Hargrove is in custody, he said. They took him out of his house 20 minutes ago. He looked around the room. And his lawyer, the one he called the second the agents arrived, is currently being detained at the Knoxville field office for questioning. Turns out his name is on the drive too. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then somebody at the back of the room Madison never saw who began to clap. Not the triumphant, noisy clapping of a celebration. The steady, deliberate clapping of people who have just watched something finished that needed to be finished. One person, then another, then the whole room until it filled the chapter house on Mill Road in Calvary, Tennessee on a Thursday night in October, while outside on the street, Wade Callahan's motorcycle stood in the light of a single overhead bulb and waited for the restoration that was finally coming. The arrest made the news by Friday morning, not the full story, not yet. The official statement from the FBI's Knoxville field office was terse and deliberate. The kind of language that communicated the essential facts without giving the defense team anything useful before the process began. Marcus Hargrove, 67, Calvary County Commissioner, taken into federal custody Thursday evening on charges of conspiracy, wire fraud and misappropriation of public funds. Investigation ongoing. 12 words on a local news ticker that represented 11 years of waiting and 14 months of grief, and one Wednesday afternoon when a girl reached to the bottom of a wooden crate and changed everything. Madison saw it on her phone at 6 in the morning. She was sitting on the floor of her apartment with her back against the bed. She hadn't slept in it. Had spent most of the night on the floor, the way she sometimes did when her thoughts were too loud for a mattress, and she read the notification 3 times before she put the phone down and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She didn't cry. She had expected to, and she did, which surprised her. Felt instead was a vast, worn-out stillness, the specific exhaustion of a long effort finally concluded. Her body acknowledging that the thing she had been running on for 48 hours was no longer strictly required, and she could, if she chose, simply stop moving for a moment. She chose to stop. Ease. She sat on the floor of her apartment in the early morning dark, and she let herself be completely still for exactly as long as it took to breathe in and out 10 times. Ease. Then she stood up. Ease. Washed her face. Ease. Made coffee. Ease. And picked up her phone to call Reed. Ease. He answered on the first ring, which told her he hadn't slept either. Ease. I saw it, she said. I know. His voice had the texture of a man who had spent the night in his own version of her floor, not literally, but occupying the same interior space, the place where things land after the action is over, and there's nothing left to do but absorb them. How are you? I don't know yet, she said honestly. I'll let you know when I figure it out. Fair enough. A pause. Come to the chapter house when you're ready. There's something we need to do today. She arrived at 10. The chapter house had a different quality that morning, not quieter exactly. But settled. The way a room settles after the furniture has finally been moved into the right arrangement after months of working around it. Several members she'd seen only briefly over the past 2 days were now present in the main room. And she felt their attention when she walked in, not hostile, not suspicious, but the particular attention of people who had heard things overnight and were trying to reconcile what they'd heard with the person standing in front of them. Reed was at the table with Pryor and Carver. Dev and Augie were on laptops. Still working, she was learning that Dev and Augie responded to major events by working harder. Processing through motion, and she respected that because she understood it. Reed stood when she came in. We told the chapter last night, he said. After you left, all of it. She looked around the room. How did they take it? Mixed, he said, with the directness she'd come to rely on. Some of them were upset about being kept outside of it. A few were angry. Pryor took that directly, explained his reasoning. Answered every question, accepted what was said to him. Reed glanced at Pryor, who was sitting at the table with the expression of a man who had spent a hard night doing something he should have done years earlier and was at peace with the cost of it. By the end, they understood. Not all of them were happy, but they understood. And now? Madison asked. Now, Carver said, from his chair, you walk into a room with 38 people who know who you are and what you did. And you see what that feels like. She looked at him. Is this a test? No. He said, it's a welcome. She walked into the main room. What happened was not dramatic. Nobody applauded. Nobody made a speech. The men who were present, all 38 by the end of the morning, because word had traveled and people had come in from wherever they'd been, acknowledged her the way people acknowledge someone who has done something real in a context where real things are what matters. A nod, a handshake, a few words. An older man whose name she didn't yet know put a hand briefly on her shoulder as he passed and said, your father would have liked us, I think, and then moved on before she had to respond. She managed not to break apart. Barely. Roy, the engine man, the one who had pulled the cylinder and found the drive, came and stood beside her at one point and said nothing for a while. He was one of the quieter ones she had noticed. He communicated through what he did more than what he said. The motorcycle, he said finally. I'd like to restore it properly. If that's all right with you and Jackson. She looked at him. Why are you asking me? He looked at her with the patient expression of someone who found the question slightly unnecessary. Because it's yours as much as it's ours now, he said. That's just how it is. She didn't argue. She wasn't sure she had a counter-argument. Merritt called at noon with the first significant update since the arrest. She spoke to Reed and Carver together, with Madison present at Reed's invitation, an invitation that had been, she was coming to understand the chapter's way of formalizing something without using formal language. The documentation from the drive has been authenticated by our forensic accountants, Merritt said. Her voice had the clipped efficiency of someone delivering information on a deadline. 15 years of wire transfers, LLC activity, and public filings tell a complete financial story. The emails are genuine. Our technical unit confirmed the metadata and server provenance this morning, a pause that had weight in it. Combined with Ashford's testimony and the physical files from Hargrove's office, the AUSA believes we have a prosecutable case on all counts. All counts, Reed said. He's conspiracy, wire fraud, misuse of public funds. Another pause. This one longer. The private investigator files from Hargrove's office. The ones containing surveillance on Thomas Carter. She chose her next words with specific care. Our investigators have identified a payment made from a Hargrove net account to the investigator 6 weeks before Thomas and Claire Carter's accident. The payment is documented. The investigator is currently in federal custody in Nashville. The room those who could hear went completely still. Are you saying, Carver began, I'm saying we have a documented financial connection between Marcus Hargrove and a man who was surveilling Thomas Carter in the weeks before his death. I'm not characterizing it beyond that at this stage. But the investigation into the accident has been formally reopened by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. He's working with our office. She paused once more. I wanted Madison to know that directly. Not through the news. Directly. Reed looked at Madison. She was standing very still. Thank you, she said. Her voice was controlled and complete and communicated everything that needed to be communicated in 2 words. There will be a long process, Merritt said. I won't pretend otherwise. But what you brought us, what Callahan built, and your father helped build, and what this chapter held on to for 11 years, it's enough. It is genuinely enough. The call ended. The room breathed. Madison sat down in the nearest chair because her legs had decided, independently of her intentions, that they had been standing long enough. Nobody commented on this. Reed sat across from her, and they looked at each other, and something passed between them that didn't require language, the specific acknowledgement that passes between people who have been through something together that changed them both. And who understand that the change is permanent. He's going to answer for it, Madison said. Reed said, both of them. Hargrove and whoever was in that car. Yes. She pressed her hands flat on the table. Felt the solid wood under her palms. My father filed that Form 302, and he didn't tell us because he was protecting us. He walked into a federal office and agreed to testify against a man who had the resources to destroy him. And he did it knowing what it might cost. And he did it anyway. She looked at Reed. He was brave. Quietly, privately, without anyone knowing. That's the hardest kind of brave. Yes, Reed said. It is. I need people to know that. Her voice tightened slightly. Not with grief, but with something more specific, the particular need of a person who loves someone to have that person seen accurately by the world. When this goes to trial, when his name comes out, I need the record to show who he was and why he did what he did. It will, Reed said. Merritt's office will make that case. And if they don't, he held her gaze. We will. She believed him. She had stopped being surprised by how completely she believed him. The weeks that followed were not simple or clean. Real things never resolve the way stories do. They resolve the way renovation does. In stages, with setbacks and complications, and periods where the progress is invisible from the outside, even when it's happening inside the walls. Hargrove's attorneys filed 3 motions in the first 2 weeks. All 3 were denied. The financial documentation from the drive was admitted into evidence in its entirety. Ashford's testimony was recorded in a formal deposition that lasted 6 hours, in which Madison was told by Merritt, who called her after, had been delivered with the particular clarity of a man who had been waiting for this room for a long time and was not going to waste it. The private investigator's name came out, a man named Dale Sutter, who had operated out of Chattanooga for 20 years on the margins of legal and illegal work. Sutter, facing federal conspiracy charges with the financial records sitting unanswerable in front of him, did what people in his position typically do. He talked. He talked for 8 hours over 2 days in an interview room in Nashville. And what he said added 3 additional charges to Hargrove's indictment and triggered an investigation into 2 other individuals whose names had not previously surfaced. Madison learned most of this through Merritt, who called with updates at intervals that Madison understood were not standard FBI procedure and were instead a specific professional courtesy extended by a woman who had read Thomas Carter's Form 302 and understood what was owed to his daughter. She continued working at Decker's yard. Hank gave her no special treatment, which was exactly what she needed: the routine of the work, the predictability of the physical tasks, the way the smell of motor oil and grease had become. Over 6 weeks, something that felt like normalcy rather than circumstance. But things were different. She was different. She ate dinner at the chapter house twice a week. Not because anyone asked her to the first time. She had simply appeared. And Carver had handed her a plate without commentary. And that had established the pattern. She learned names. She learned histories. She learned that Dev had grown up in Nashville and had 2 daughters in college who called him every Sunday. That Augie had been a high school math teacher for 12 years before joining the chapter. That Roy had never married, but had a sister in Chattanooga he visited every Thanksgiving and brought homemade preserves for, which he made himself from fruit he grew in his backyard. She learned that 38 people who appeared, from the outside, to be a single consolidated thing were in fact 38 entirely separate human beings with their own specific griefs and joys and embarrassments and private loyalties, and that what held them together was not agreement about everything but commitment to something, a version of the word home, that was chosen rather than inherited. She had not had a chosen home before. She had not understood before that chosen was the more durable kind. 6 weeks after the arrest, Roy called her to the chapter house on a Tuesday morning with a formality that was unusual for him. He met her in the workshop where the motorcycle had been moved. He'd been working on it. She could see that it was in a different state than it had been, more complete. The engine reassembled with new components where the old ones had failed. The chrome cleaned to something close to its original condition. It wasn't finished, but it was closer. "I want to show you something," Roy said. He led her to the right side of the engine. "When I was cleaning the cases, getting ready to reassemble, I found one more mark. I almost missed it. It's here." He pointed to a spot on the engine case. Low on the right side, almost at the bottom. I had a light at an angle I'd never tried before, and it just appeared. She crouched and looked. The mark was the smallest of all of them. Half an inch, maybe less, scratched with the same deliberate hand as all the others. But this one was different in character. It wasn't a reference number or a directional indicator. It was a shape she recognized after a moment, a simple thing. 2 curved lines that formed something like a pair of wings, or an open hand or a bird in flight. The kind of mark that didn't encode information so much as it expressed something. She stared at it for a long time. "What do you think it means?" Roy asked. She thought about Wade Callahan working in the dark with a steel scribe. Adding marks to a machine over months, encoding evidence and maps and trails that led to a cylinder and a drive and 15 years of documentation. She thought about the last mark not part of the system. Not functional in the way the others were functional. But placed at the very bottom of the engine on the side nobody checked. Where it could only be found by someone who had already found everything else. "I think," she said slowly, "that it means he knew someone would get there eventually. And he wanted to leave something that wasn't about the corruption or the evidence or the investigation." She straightened up. "I think he left something that was just for them. For whoever found it." She paused. "Something that said, it worked. You made it." Roy looked at the mark for a moment. "Yeah," he said. His voice was slightly different than usual. "That's what I thought too. The trial date was set for 9 months out. Long enough for the defense to prepare, long enough for the prosecution to build the case into something airtight, long enough for the TBI to complete its investigation into the accident on Route 22. 8 months in, the TBI announced findings. Madison was at the chapter house when Merritt called. Reed was beside her, and Carver, and Pryor the inner circle, the people who had been there from the first night. She put the phone on speaker because she could not have processed what Merritt said alone. And she knew it, and knowing it felt like a form of strength rather than weakness. Merritt was direct. She was always direct. The TBI has concluded its investigation into the October 2024 accident on Route 22 involving Thomas and Claire Carter. Based on vehicle forensic analysis, electronic data recovered from a cell tower near the accident site, and testimony from Dale Sutter, they have determined that the accident was not accidental. A breath. Ease. The evidence supports a finding of deliberate vehicular interference. Ease. Sutter has admitted to his role. He has formally implicated Hargrove in the instruction and authorization of the act. Another breath. Ease. Hargrove's charges have been amended to include 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. The room held that. Ease. Completely, without movement. Then Madison said, in a voice that was quiet and clear and entirely composed, "My parents were murdered." "Yes," Merritt said. "I'm sorry." "I'm genuinely sorry." "Don't be sorry," Madison said. "You did your job. My father did his job. Wade did his job. Everybody did what they were supposed to do. It just took a long time for all the pieces to land in the right place." She looked at the people in the room, at Reed and Carver and Pryor, at the faces she had come to know over the past 8 months, at the chapter house that had become, without her planning it, something she thought of as home. My parents deserve to have someone stand up for them. They're getting that now. That's what matters, Merritt said. There will be press. When the amended charges are announced, your family's story will be public. All of it your father's cooperation. His Form 302, his role in building the case. People will know who he was. Good, Madison said. Just that word, like a door closing on the right side of something. After the call ended, the room was quiet for a while. Then Reed said, "How are you?" She thought about it honestly. She had learned, in the past 8 months, to think about that question honestly, rather than reflexively to actually check. Rather than deflecting with what she was supposed to say. "I'm sad," she said. "I'll probably be sad for a long time about certain parts of this. But I'm not." She started again. "I'm not the person I was when I walked into this building. That person was alone and running out of reasons to keep going. And I don't think she knew it. I know it now." Looking back, she looked at Reed. "I'm not that person anymore." Reed nodded. He didn't say anything immediately. He was the kind of man who let true things be true, without immediately filling the space around them. Pryor spoke first, which was unusual for him. "Wade would have liked you," he said. "I've been thinking about how to say that for 8 months, and that's the most accurate version I've found." "I know," she said. "I feel like I know him. Isn't that strange? I've never met him. I found a mark he scratched into metal years before I was old enough to understand what it meant. And I feel like I know him." "That's not strange," Carver said. That's what people leave behind when they do something right. You don't have to have met them. Their work introduces them." She sat with that. Then Dev came in from the corridor with the expression of a man who had found something. And the rhythm of the room shifted immediately because everyone in it had spent 8 months learning to read Dev's expressions, and this one meant information. "Hargrove's lead attorney filed this morning to withdraw from the case," Dev said. He cited a conflict of interest, which means he found something that makes him personally liable, Augie said. From his laptop in the corner, where he had been listening while appearing not to. Sutter gave them more, Carver said. "It wasn't a question." Has to be, Dev confirmed. Whatever he said in that last deposition moved someone who was planning to defend this to the end into finding a sudden conflict of interest. Reed looked at Madison. "The attorney's name was on the drive," he said. "We flagged it 8 months ago, I remember," she said. He's been waiting to see which way it went. Now he knows. The specific satisfaction of watching a structure collapse from the inside, of watching the people who had built a corrupt system begin to protect themselves from each other as it came down, was not the same as joy. It was something colder and more precise. It was the feeling of a thing being corrected, of the world, making a specific adjustment back toward what it was supposed to be. Good, Madison said. The same word she'd used with Merritt. It covered the same ground. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Madison was present for every day of it. She sat in the gallery with Carver on her left and Roy on her right. And behind her, rotating through the available seats in the public gallery on different days. Members of the chapter came and sat. Not all 38 could be there. Everyday people had lives, jobs, families. But someone was always there. Every single day of the trial, someone from the chapter was in that gallery. Nobody asked them to do this. Nobody organized it. It happened the way things happen in a community that has decided something matters organically. Without instruction, through the shared understanding that presence is a form of statement and that Madison Carter should not sit in that courtroom alone. She didn't. Thomas Carter's Form 302 was read into the record on the seventh day of trial. The AUSA read it slowly, the way important documents deserve to be read, giving every sentence its full weight. Not rushing toward the next word before the current one had landed. Madison sat completely still through the reading. She had read it herself. Alone 2 months earlier, Merritt had fulfilled her promise and provided a copy. And Madison had read it in her apartment on a Sunday morning with the windows open and the sounds of cavalry coming in from outside. She had read it 3 times. She knew what it said. But hearing it read aloud in a federal courtroom, in a room where the man responsible for her father's death was sitting 12 feet away, that was different from reading it alone. That was her father's voice entering public record. That was his words becoming part of the permanent, documented story of what had happened in this county and why it mattered. I am providing this statement because I believe the public has a right to know how the resources of this county have been used and by whom. I understand there may be risk involved in providing this information. I have considered that risk, and I believe it is outweighed by what is right. I have spent 20 years working with public records. I know what these documents mean. I know what they prove. And I know that the people of this county deserve to have someone tell the truth about them. Carver put his hand on her shoulder briefly when the AUSA finished reading. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Marcus Hargrove was convicted on all counts. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. When the verdict came back, Madison was in the hallway outside the courtroom. She had stepped out for 5 minutes because she needed to breathe air that didn't carry the accumulated weight of 3 weeks of testimony. And Carver found her there and told her with specific directness of a man who understood that the most respectful thing he could give her was the truth delivered clearly. He's guilty, he said. All of it. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes for exactly 10 seconds. She counted them. Then she opened her eyes and straightened and said, good, for the 3rd time, because the words still covered everything it needed to cover. The sentencing was 3 months later. Hargrove received 31 years on the combined counts. Dale Sutter received 22 in exchange for his cooperation. 2 additional individuals identified through Sutter's final deposition received sentences of their own. The day the sentencing was announced, Madison drove out to Route 22. She had not been back to the road since she'd learned what had happened there. She had thought about going many times, had driven toward it twice and turned around both times, and had waited until the morning after the sentencing because she needed the legal conclusion before she could have the personal one. She parked on the shoulder. She got out. She stood on the side of the road where 11 years ago, Wade Callahan's motorcycle had sat with its keys in the ignition and its engine cold, and where 14 months ago, the people she loved most in the world had died for knowing the truth about what that motorcycle contained. She stood there for a long time. She wasn't performing grief or resolve or closure. She was doing something simpler, which was being present in a place that mattered, allowing herself to feel what she felt without managing it into something appropriate. What she felt was large and complicated and not fully nameable, and that was fine. Some things don't resolve into language. They just become part of the structure you carry. She heard motorcycles before she saw them. 4 of them, coming from the direction of town. They slowed as they approached and pulled onto the shoulder behind her car, engines dropping to idle and then going quiet. She turned. Reed, Carver, Pryor, Roy. They got off their bikes and stood without speaking. They hadn't asked permission to come. They hadn't called ahead. They had simply known where she would be and had come. Ease. The way people come when they understand that certain moments should not be faced alone. Ease. Reed walked up and stood beside her. He looked at the road. Ease. He found the motorcycle right about here, Reed said. He's your father. Give or take. I know, she said. They stood in silence for a while. Ease. Traffic passed occasionally, people going to work. Ease. Going home. Living the ordinary daily continuity of lives that didn't know this stretch of road carried the weight it carried. Ease. Wade left that last mark, Pryor said, from where he stood a few feet back. Ease. The one at the bottom of the engine. I've been thinking about it since Roy found it. Me too, Madison said. Ease. He put it there because he knew whoever found everything else would be the right person. Ease. And he wanted to leave them something that said, you can stop now. Ease. The job is done. You made it. Pryor paused. I think he would have said the same thing to your father, Ease, if he'd had the chance. Madison looked at the road. Ease. He would have said it to both of you, Reed said. Ease, she breathed in. The October air was cold and clean. Ease. The same October that had started the same season. Ease. Almost exactly a year later, the world having turned a full circle and come back to this road and this sky and this specific quality of morning light in the mountains of eastern Tennessee. Ease. She thought about her father driving to work on a morning not unlike this one. Ease. 11 years ago, and seeing something on the shoulder that stopped him. Ease. She thought about the person he had been methodical. Ease. Careful, brave, in the particular way that quiet people are brave. Ease. Without announcement, without expectation of recognition. Ease. Because the thing was right, and that was enough. She thought about Wade building his message in the dark and trusting it to last. Ease. She thought about the marks inside the machine, waiting for the right reader. Ease. And the right reader turning over a piece of metal on a Wednesday afternoon with grease on her hands and nothing left to lose. Ease. The smallest things, the most ordinary moments. A girl reaching into a crate. Ease. A man stopping his car. A motorcycle sitting in a locked room for 11 years. Ease. All of it leading here, she said, without turning around. Ease. I want to stay in Calvary. Nobody responded immediately. Ease. She could feel them receiving it. I want to finish what I started at Decker's yard. Ease. And I want to help Roy finish the motorcycle, and I want to keep having dinner twice a week at the chapter house. She turned around and looked at the four of them, at these men who had become Ease. Without any formal declaration or ceremony, the people she called when something happened. Ease. The people she thought of when she thought of home. Ease. Is that all right with everyone? Carver said. You're asking as though you'd accept no for an answer. I wouldn't, she said. Ease. Then it's all right, Reed said. She looked at them for a moment. Ease. Then she looked at the road one last time, at the ordinary stretch of asphalt that had held extraordinary things. Ease. That had witnessed the beginning and nearly the end, and now the completion of something that had started before she was old enough to understand it. Ease. Okay, she said, let's go home. She walked back to her car. Ease. Behind her, four motorcycles started in sequence one. Ease. Then another, then the other two, a sound that she had learned. Ease in the past 8 months, to associate with the particular sensation of not being alone in the world. Ease. She pulled out onto Route 22 and they fell in behind her. Ease. And she drove back toward Calvary with 4 Hell's Angels as her escort and the morning light coming through the windshield. And Ease, for the first time in 14 months, a feeling in her chest that was not grief wearing the mask of forward motion. Ease. It was something cleaner, something that had taken a long time to find its way back to her. Ease. She drove toward it without hesitation, the way her father had taught her to move toward things that mattered. Ease. The way Wade Callahan had built a message into a machine and trusted it to find the right hands. Ease. The way that people who believe in something carry it forward. Ease. Even when carrying it costs everything, because the cost is what makes it true. Ease. And the truth is the only thing that lasts. Madison Carter drove into Calvary with her family behind her, and she did not look back.